About half of secular Israelis, 48%, are unwilling to live alongside Haredim or ultra-Orthodox Jews. That's according to a poll conducted by the Illuma Equality Advocacy Group and the ERI Research Institute in Israel. According to the poll, 69% of secular Israelis said they would rather have Arab neighbors than Haredi ones. This, as another 62% said they would rather live next to Bedouins, who are also Palestinian descendants, than with the ultra-Orthodox Jews.
Well, the situation is not very exciting. It's not very... we didn't choose it, but it happened. I mean, quite a few times in the year, in every year, all the time there is, opportunities when the secular and the non-secular have, very complicated discussions between each other. And with the corona, we've seen it so many times, and I hope it's going to go down. But it looks that there is a big wall between the secular people and the non-secular people.
This is a record high of hostility towards the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel. According to the author of the study, Dr. Gali Sambira, there's no doubt that the greatest tension exists between the ultra-Orthodox and secular Israelis. The secular Israelis who identify themselves as liberals are only liberal towards the sectors that are convenient for them, the study noted. For example, they are liberal towards Arabs, but not towards the ultra-Orthodox Jews. This, while traditional Israelis are liberal towards religious Israelis and the ultra-Orthodox. Each group considers itself to be liberal. Apparently, the coronavirus pandemic also increased the polarization. 74% of Haredim reported that the situation has become worse towards them. They feel it in real life as well. One respondent to the survey said, "If I cough on the bus, I feel like a hired assassin. If a Haredi gets on the bus, he immediately feels like an enemy to the people." The results of the poll showed the evident polarization between different sectors in Israel. Among the different groups in Israel, the greatest tension exists between the ultra-Orthodox and secular Israelis. Secularism is the point of content between Zionists and the ultra-Orthodox community inside and outside of Israel. Many in Israel and of course across the world wrongly believe that Zionism is a part of Judaism, or is compatible with Judaism, or is even the main part of Judaism. All of those are actually false, according to ultra-Orthodox Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro. Zionism was created to negate Judaism. Zionism was created to replace Judaism. The differences between Judaism and Zionism are vast and profound.
צריך להבין כי כל מטרת הציונים לעקור את הדת היהודי משורשיו. והיהודים החרדים בעצם קיומם מזכירים להם שיהודים בלי תורת משה אין הם נחשבים ליהודים. כמובן כי כל מטרת הציונות הוא להפוך את העם היהודי לעם חדש. מנותק משורשיו היהודיים, ועל כן בעיני מנהיגי הציונות הוא חשיבות מדרגה ראשונה להשפיל ולדכא את היהודים החרדים בכל האמצעים העומדים לרשותם. התקשורת הציונית מלבה ומשסה נגד היהודים החרדים, עקב כך שמתנגדים נחרצות נגד עצם קיום המדינה הציונית, ואינם מכירים בהם כלל, ובכך לעשות מהם דה-לגיטימציה. הנקודה העיקרית הוא שהחילונים מבינים שהיהודים החרדים מבחינה השקפה יהודית אותנטית רואים בהם כאינם יהודים ואינם יכולים להשלים עם זה.
On social media, the conversation took a different turn. Shira on Twitter says, I guess I've always thought I was very familiar with those rifts. Like I thought the main Orthodox secular rift was between the Haredim and secular Israelis, but I didn't realize how much animosity there was between secular Israelis and the group I most identify with, Dati Liyumi. Genesis says they are very secular though, and this often puts them at odds with other right-wing parties because they think the Hasidic Haredim should do their military service just like other Israelis. Gil says Israeli society has an aggressive counter-push to it between Haredim and secular authorities. I've only seen it up close a few times, but it's scary on both sides.
Each time that there is a trial, that he must stand for a trial, he's not coming, or he's making a closer for Israel or something, and we are really mad at him.
Okay, well, the question here is what the definition of Judaism and Jews is. Basically, Judaism is a religion, a pure religion, the service of Almighty God, the practice of the commandments of the Torah, the Jewish requirements, versus the new nationalistic political movement, Zionism, which drops everything holy and everything attached to God. One of the basics of Judaism is a concept that Jewish people are in exile. For 2,000 years, we are forbidden to fight other nations. Then we have this new movement which fights for their nationalism and for their country. These people from the very beginning are embarrassed by traditional Judaism. They didn't want to see this continuing. They don't want to see this in their way. But still in all, we are here. Our communities are strong. We are loyal to God. We don't fight our neighbors. We practice our religion. And this is unappreciated by them. From the very beginning, they attempted and they did all in their ability to uproot Judaism, the belief in God, from the masses of the Jewish people. Aside of their movement, who were people that unfortunately left Judaism for a long time, they attempted to uproot Judaism from the remaining communities in the Holy Land, or those who immigrated to the Holy Land. They did everything they could to impose their lifestyle and their beliefs and their approach upon everyone. They hoped that Jewish tradition would no longer continue, but thank God they were unsuccessful. They are unsuccessful. Well, unfortunately, the mainstream media in Israel, as in so many other parts of the world, are on the other side, are on the side of the secular people in Israel. Unfortunately, they don't respect the community that lived in the Holy Land way before Zionism and this new movement came up to the Holy Land. They don't respect the serious communities in the Holy Land, the serious leadership of our communities, and all these communities are totally disregarded, not respected, and basically oppressed.
Much of the ultra-Orthodox community considers itself anti-Zionist. Much of the friction between the secular community and the ultra-Orthodox community revolves around the definition of Judaism and what Zionism means for both groups. The propaganda that Zionists have churned out for the past 100 years have confused and conflicted Zionism and Judaism. The average person thinks that Israel is the Jewish so-called state and that Zionism is Judaism and wouldn't know the difference. According to Zionism, Jewish identity is political and it is also national. According to Judaism, Jewish identity is completely religious. Thus, a Jew by definition is somebody who accepted the Jewish religion, or somebody that is defined by the Jewish religion as a Jew. According to Zionism, however, Jewish identity is political and it is defined the same way that we define any nationalist, like a Canadian or a Frenchman. According to Zionism, Jewish identity is centered around a nation-state which they randomly decided is the nation-state that was incepted in 1948 onto Palestinian lands that they call Israel. So you can see that the differences are immense, and the friction has been there since the inception of Palestinian lands in 1948 and has only grown far apart. The latest poll by the Illuma Equality Advocacy Group and the ERI Research Institute in Israel on the tension between secular Israelis and the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community only confirms this schism.
היהודים החרדים מאמינים שהאלוקים ששלח נבואתו ביד הנביא עמוס יתקיימו במילואם, ואלו דברי הנביא עמוס. הנה השם אלוקים בממלכה החטאה, והשמדתי אותה מעל פני האדמה. והציונות, שאין ממלכה חטאה יותר גדולה מהם בגלובוס כולו, ייעלמו מהמפה. והחילונים מאמינים שהם ימשיכו להתקיים בלי גבול. מטרת הציונות הייתה לגזול את אדמת פלסטינה בכוח הרציחה והאכזריות שלהם ובכוח הנשק, ולגרש את התושבים הפלסטיניים מארצם וממולדתם, וחשבו שבכך יצליחו להביא את היהודים מכל קצרי תבל לפלסטינה, ולעקור מהם את האמונה באלוקים, ולהשלות את היהודים התמימים שהם המשיח שלהם, והם יגלו את עצמם מהגלות בכוח הזרוע, ואינם צריכים עוד להמתין לגאולת האלוקים. ואנחנו היהודים האותנטיים מאמינים שתתקיים נבואתו של הנביא צפניה, כי אז אהפוך אל עמים שפה ברורה לקרוא כולם בשם השם ולעבדו שכם אחד, והייתה לשם המלוכה.
On social media, the conversation took a different turn. Baruch on Twitter says, the same way the Israeli left and secular parties uses Haredim as a boogeyman to galvanize their electorate, they use the settlers. We have huge budgets. We upset the Arabs and the world. We're fanatics. What type of kippah do secular Israeli politicians wear when they're at a religious ceremony or place? I've noticed that often left-wing politicians use knitted kippahs, customary among the religious Zionists, and right-wing politicians put black kippahs like the ultra-Orthodox Haredim. Brian says, you must admit that it's a similar thing going on in secular Israeli minds when Haredim start moving into their neighborhoods, and they begin to worry that the Haredim will start demanding that shops close on Shabbat, no driving on the street, etc.
It was certainly not done for the peaceful, religious, God-fearing community that lived in the Holy Land way before this movement came. This was not done for refugees from the Holocaust, who are seriously religious people and very strongly opposed the movement of Zionism even before the Holocaust. This was done for the people who dropped Judaism for a long time and insisted that they want to have a sovereign homeland for themselves, which happens to be in total contrast to Judaism and Jewish tradition. And they forced so many people to go along with their philosophy. Unfortunately, so many refugees from the Holocaust that didn't have any other choice, and they were like almost forced to immigrate to the Holy Land. This was not in favor of so many people who could have had so many other alternatives. And unfortunately, they were forced to the Holy Land against their will. Now, to make this very clear, this is not in favor of the Jewish people as a whole. This is not in favor of God or God's religion. This is in favor of a community of people who decided to drop God and drop Jewish religion and do their political movement on the account of so many people, Jewish and non-Jewish alike. Okay, religious Jews follow God, believe in the basics of Jewish belief, practice the Jewish religion, the commandments, 613 commandments of the Holy Torah. One of the basics of Jewish belief is that we are in exile and we are forbidden to fight other nations. We are required to live in peace with our neighbors, not to harm or, God forbid, kill anyone. On the other side, we have the Zionist movement, which is generally speaking, the secular movement of Israel in general terms, who don't practice Judaism, don't believe in God. As I say, they simply don't believe in God. This was from the very beginning of Zionism to the present day. Masses of Jewish people, unfortunately, and they have nothing in their way to continue to support their national movement and their state of Israel, which they believe and they insist to call this a Jewish state. They would oppress other people, as unfortunately we see already for decades, kill and steal everything which is forbidden in Judaism. We need to be very clear and we need to understand a very simple concept. There is a great difference between Judaism and Zionism. Judaism is a religion, an ancient old thousands of year religion and masses of Jewish people, basically the entire Jewish people that follow this religion for thousands of years. Then we have a relatively new movement, a national movement, which has nothing to do with religion, has nothing to do with godliness, a purely political movement, basically transforming Judaism from a religion into a nationalism. Should never be confused. In addition, my final point is that we have to understand, and masses of people in the world need to understand, that the state of Israel as a government, as a movement, in no way represents world Jewry. It's a group of people who happen to be from Jewish descent, who don't follow anything of Judaism. And still in all, they do everything they can, and all crimes they commit, all violations of God's word and God's Torah, and unfortunately they still insist to represent all Jews. This is not the case, and should never be. They should never be considered as the representation of myself, my family, my communities, or the Jewish world at large.
The new data coming out of Israel on the tensions between secular Israelis and the ultra-Orthodox community gives clues of a crumbling society. The data shows that it is merely impossible for secular Israelis and the ultra-Orthodox community to coexist side by side. They believe that they are too different to live in the same neighborhood. The Israeli project meant to bring the two groups together to justify it as a home for all Jews. But it seems that not all Jews feel this way, as there are some fundamental issues that Israel can't seem to get rid of. For now, it seems that the crumbling apart of Israeli society continues, all the while politicians have immersed themselves in a fourth election after 3 failed ones in less than 2 years. Here are the news making the press in Israel. The Jerusalem Post. A large majority of the Israeli public, 56%, believes that an incident similar to the storming of Capitol Hill by masses of protesters in Washington could take place in Israel. A poll conducted by Menahem Laser from Panels Politics for Ma'ariv, the Jerusalem Post's sister publication, found that 23% of respondents are sure that such an incident could take place in Israel as well. And another 33% guess that such an incident that shook the U.S. 2 days ago could happen as well. Ynet News. Riots erupted on the streets of 2 predominantly ultra-Orthodox communities after police broke up 2 massive illegal weddings just hours after Israel announced it was tightening its coronavirus lockdown. Police officers who arrived at the scene following reports of a mass event at first couldn't enter the event hall, which had a lock on the doors. Upon entering, the Rebbe was asked to disperse the event, but in response he offered police officers wine, who allowed the mass event to continue, with hundreds of attendees dancing and singing in a confined space with no social distancing or face masks. The Times of Israel. The Israeli Shin Bet internal spy service hacked the phones of several anti-Netanyahu protesters on suspicion they sought to break into the Prime Minister's residence in occupied Jerusalem Al-Quds, Channel 13 News reported. The report said the agency was granted authorization to read messages on demonstrators' phones and search their homes after a number of protesters breached a police barricade outside the compound, with Netanyahu and his wife Sarah reportedly moved to a safe room. I-24 News. As Vice President Biden condemned building of 1,600 housing units in occupied eastern Jerusalem Al-Quds in 2010, Israel is expected to greenlight construction of new housing units in the eastern part of occupied Jerusalem Al-Quds before the swearing in of U.S. President-elect Joe Biden on January 20, public broadcaster Can reported.